Broadcasting from Studio 202 at the Springett Technology Center in Navasota, Texas, it's NOV Live. Now, let's start the show.
Hello and welcome to NOV Live. My name is Shelby Dumaine and I'm your host for today. If you caught us a few minutes ago, you were there for the CCUS 101 session. We're here for our second session. We're going to be talking about CO2 conditioning. And before we get to our excellent guests, we have some more guests in the studio. I want to bring on a familiar face. We have Kamal Carr back. She's still here. She's on the social desk today. Kamal, can you tell people how they can engage with the show?
Of course. Like Shelby said, this is a live show. So we will be having live questionnaire. So if you have any questions for our experts, please go ahead and put it in the comments. And myself will be going through it and we will be asking your question.
Excellent. Thank you, Kamal. Thank you for being back for this session as well. And I want to go ahead and introduce our guests. We have Brent Staley and Dieter Muller. Do y'all mind introducing yourself first and telling folks at home a little bit about what you do here at NOV and on the low carbon team?
Sure. Thank you so much, Shelby, for having us again today. My name is Brent Staley. I'm the Business Development Manager for our Low Carbon Solutions Group. And my main role is to go out and seek projects and deploy our technology for carbon capture and CO2 conditioning projects, as well as hydrogen. So great to be here.
Excellent. So a good person to have to talk about CO2 conditioning, it sounds like. Excellent. Dieter?
Yes, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Dieter Muller. I'm working as Technology and Sales Manager for Low Carbon Solutions. So my background is a chemical engineer, but my role within the team is working with technical sales, but also, let's say, bridging the gap from technical to commercial. And I'm based in Oslo, Norway. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for joining us. So yeah, it is afternoon for you. So good afternoon, not just good morning. Thank you for being here. And I want to start off with maybe the kind of basics question. Can you tell me what is CO2 conditioning? I think we might have mentioned it in the CCUS 101, but can y'all share a little bit about what CO2 conditioning is and where it fits in with carbon capture?
Sure, I'll take this question. Yeah, so CO2 conditioning is typically referred to, let's say, treating a concentrated CO2 to an elevated state for transportation. This often refers to either temperature or pressure adjustments and also impurities removal. Impurities in the CO2 that typically are required to treat is water and oxygen, and there's also other impurities depending on the source. I think the type of conditioning or technologies that's implemented can actually vary quite a bit. There's several factors that can dictate the choice and what's required. One is going to be referring to the transportation means. Other is the carbon capture technology that's been used, and also the CO2 source. Where is it coming from? Mm-hmm. So typically, like I would say, the most common impurity that is often talked about when you talk about CO2 conditioning is water removal. So water is typically removed through CO2 dehydration technologies. We work with three different types, and these are the three most common. One is referred to as TAG dehydration. The other is temperature swing adsorption. So this is offered by using BASF Sorbid, which is alumina silica gel-based adsorbent, or molecular sieve. And like I said, it depends on the different means of transportation can dictate what is actually required. So when you say about, let's say, CO2 transportation nowadays, when it's used for EOR, most common transportation mean is by pipeline. So when you transport CO2 by pipeline, it's typically transported at elevated pressures and in, let's say, supercritical liquid state. But when you talk about the North Sea, or let's say Northern Europe, where you have offshore CO2 storage developments, this often implies there might be different means of transportation legs. So you can have pipeline to ship and then ship back to pipeline. So this actually requires different types of conditions. So there are different let's say, developments being established right now, looking at CO2 transportation by ship. There's medium pressure transport, there's the low pressure shipping, and they all have their different requirements for the CO2.
Shelby, I'll jump in here.
Yeah.
So Dieter talked about removing the water from the CO2. What's so crucial about that is if you don't remove the water, then the CO2 is very corrosive. It's a carbonic acid by nature. And really, really important in driving the whole CCUS market is the public perception that this is a safe process. And it is, but you've got the one of the most crucial aspects of it is the conditioning of the CO2, because if you don't remove enough water, and then that CO2 can cause problems in the value chain, in the pipeline, in the compression equipment, and everything downstream of the capture system. So it's a very important part of the value chain, and it is safely removed and very safe through pipeline transport as these technologies go forward. But there isn't a one technology suits all, like Dieter said. It depends on the application. It depends on the needs of the pipeline, and then the selection of the technology is based on those needs.
And can you talk a little bit about maybe our history with some of those examples, some of that gas conditioning?
Absolutely. And Salim did a great job of talking a little bit about where our history goes. But NOV's well stream processing group's legacy goes all the way back to 1978, the Kverner Process Systems Group in Oslo, Norway. And over the last 35 plus years, these guys, they've been a leading technology provider in traditional upstream oil and gas as a process technology provider. And through a series of acquisitions and mergers, NOV acquired this group in 2016. And today, Wellstream Processing, we're at the forefront of providing process technology in upstream oil and gas and for the low carbon technology industry.
Yeah, I think we've had a couple shows on some different areas in the Wellstream processing space. So yeah, it's really exciting. Always great to talk to those folks. I wanted to ask also a little bit follow up, or kind of similar to what I asked in the earlier show. Like I said, I don't lay all off too easy. Can you share a little bit about some of the challenges related to the conditioning part of the CCUS chain?
Sure. I'll take this question. This is always a good question because, like say the energy transition, there's of course always challenges. So when it comes to the CO2 conditioning, I would generally kind of narrow it down to, let's say, 2 challenges. Of course, there's much more, but one being the inconsistent CO2 specifications. So depending on the pipeline development or the developer, there's often different CO2 specifications. So that can actually have a knock-on effect on the upstream processing. I'll give you one example. There are some pipelines that are going to be designed for quite lenient water specification. They have been operated for many years, but at the same time, there's some developments been looking at retrofitting old piping that's been used for transporting natural gas for CO2 injection. And they might have different water ratings that they can handle. So this also has a little bit of a, let's say, inconsistency on how you're going to be looking at CO2 conditioning. The other, I would say, is impurities. Of course, when you talk about CO2 capture, you're going to up-concentrate your CO2 and have a product. But this CO2, depending on the source or the technology that you are using, you will have different impurities that will be following through. And this can actually influence your process design packages. One example could be looking at the most common technology used, or let's say commercially ready right now, if you look at post-combustion carbon capture, is solvent-based technologies. For this, there will be some oxygen residual that will be passed on through the CO2. This is often treated in the CO2 conditioning steps by deoxygenation, which is a catalyst bed that will be reacting the oxygen to form a water byproduct. However, if you're using different technologies such as membrane technology, you can get a much higher oxygen content in the CO2, which will impact and drastically change your design for your CO2 conditioning. So these are a few of the challenges that are being faced, and I think the most important thing when we talk about these challenges, it's very important that we're talking to all parties involved, all stakeholders involved, talking to the developers, understanding what their challenges and constraints are, and also looking at the upstream value chain. What are the capture technologies and what will be the knock-on effect by selecting these technologies. So I think we have a very good international community that's looking at collaboration when it comes to CCS, and I think this is really important, and we should continue this.
Absolutely, yeah. Sometimes some of these conversations do make me wish I paid a little more attention in chemistry in high school, but I think I still understood. You did a really excellent job of explaining that, so I appreciate that. And Brent, I want
you and me both, Shelby. One of the things that he touched on early that's really important is, you know, as NOV is positioning ourselves as a technology provider, equipment provider, you can imagine that one of the biggest challenges that Salim referenced earlier is the cost. CO2 is a waste stream. So anything we can do to bring that cost down is going to help deploy and enable deployment of carbon capture. But as we're as an equipment provider trying to bring down the costs, and you have the specifications for the CO2 stream, the contaminants, the water content, as that varies across even just the US, but across the globe, you can see how it would be difficult for NOV to standardize a package. And that's kind of the challenge that we've been taking on, is we've got to bring these costs down. And so that's what we're trying to do. But that's a challenge as these specs can get aligned and there can be some agreement on what is safe, what is a safe amount of water that can be transported these pipelines. It will really help technology providers like NOV move the technology forward and bring those costs down.
And how are we involved in this area? What is it? I know we talked about the history. What is it today? What is our involvement?
So it's fortunate that there's a lot of projects that are coming online and are being green lighted. Specifically, we're seeing a lot of movement and activity in the Gulf of Mexico and Louisiana and in Texas. And so a lot of those projects, customers are settling on their technology selection, they're settling on their pipeline specs. And so those projects are moving forward. One of the ways that NOV is what we're leveraging is our digitalization platform that we've been so successful in deploying in our traditional oil and gas projects. What we're doing is we're deploying that technology, leveraging that expertise and knowledge to these low carbon initiatives. One example is our smart bed technology. So for our CO2 dehydration, that is thermal swing adsorption. So Dieter referred to it as our desiccant or BSF sorbate technology or molecular sieve technology. Right now, the way that the technology is universally is it's a timer-based technology. And so you cycle the absorption bed on for several hours, and then after that time is up, it cycles off. So what we're doing is we're creating a condition-based design where we can monitor how much water is being absorbed, how dry the bed is when you're regenerating. And what's that doing? It's enhancing performance, it's increasing bed life, and it's reducing the energy usage that's required for these systems. And so in that regard, it's changing the industry and solutions that we're bringing forward.
Absolutely. Very exciting stuff. Very exciting. Again, I wish I had a little bit more of that chemistry brain, but I can still tell that it's really exciting. We have a lot of a big role to play and with CO2 conditioning and with CCUS overall.
It's an exciting time. It's an exciting time to be at the forefront of putting forward these technologies that are changing the world.
Absolutely. And I don't want to let y'all go before I check in with our audience. So we're going to send it back to Kamal. Do we have any questions for the experts?
We do. So this is for the both of you, Brent and Dieter. So how important is having good CO2 conditioning for the longevity of equipment and for the cost of an overall project?
Especially when we're talking about that corrosivity or corrosiveness.
Yes, I can start off. I think it's a very good question. It is important that you do have good conditioning, because there are consequences which may not be apparent initially, and it could have knock-on effects. So if you're actually not monitoring your water or oxygen in your CO2, this could actually have downstream effects on the CO2 corrosion. So that can be actually much more expensive than investing properly into a CO2 conditioning package. Replacing hundreds of miles or kilometers of pipeline is very expensive. So this is, let's say, a small investment to protect the downstream.
I would also add it there's also a limit, right? A safe is a safe is a safe, it's safe enough. And so going past that is just extra cost that you're incurring on a project. And so there are technologies that can get the water content spec down to, less than 1 part per million. And I would say that that's going too far, and you're just incurring too much cost. So there's got to be a level. It's hard to give out a number because each application, each pipeline has its own set of challenges. But there's got to be some agreement on what that number is, so that we can kind of move forward. And they've been transporting CO2 for 50 years for the enhanced oil recovery in oil and gas very safely with minimal problems. And so this is not a problem that cannot be solved. I've always said carbon capture, it's not a technical problem. The technical solutions are there. It's a public perception. It's the cost. These are all the challenges that we're striving to overcome. But technically speaking, these problems are very, very solvable.
Right. It's nothing new.
Correct.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much both for joining today. And also thank you for that question that you submitted. And thank you for everybody who's tuning in. Don't go too far. We'll be back in another 10 minutes for our final session today. We're going to be talking a little bit about standardization and the future of CCUS, future projects. So stay tuned for that. We'll be back with Salim. And this has been NOV Live. And we'll see you in just a few minutes.